Okay, so today we are doing my monthly wrap-up. We're going to talk about all the books that I read in the month of January. Wow, it's still January. Well, not at the time you're watching this. Anyway, we're going to talk about all the books that I read in January. First, we should probably shout out the books that I'm currently reading. Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. I am solidly getting on with it. 463 pages in, so I'll have this bad boy done very soon. Videos for it will be up next week. And Malazan Book 2, I am 170 pages in, so less impressive. But I'm actually really enjoying it. I had really mixed feelings about Book 1 and didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I've been really having a good time with Book 2. So that's solid. Both of those books will be carrying on into next month, but there's an update on what I'm currently reading. And now for the stats of what I actually read this month. So I read a total of 12 books this month. And as far as categories and age range, they were a little bit all over the place. And for my star ratings, I'm really happy with how it went. I didn't actually dislike anything that I read. I at least enjoyed everything that I read this month. So this is going to be a pretty positive wrap up. I thoroughly enjoyed most everything I read, and I even have a couple of new favorites. Definitely one new favorite for sure. Anyway, as always, we're going to talk about these books starting from lowest all the way up to highest rated, but keep in mind that even the ones that are going to be talked about in the beginning, I still liked at least. So the first book that I'm going to talk about that I read this month is Where the Sidewalk Ends. This is a book that was sent to me by a subscriber, and okay, I forgot about this book. I read it a bunch in middle school, and I loved it. But then I forgot it existed until it came in the mail. And it brought back so many memories, so I immediately started reading it. And I enjoyed myself reading this so much. This is a collection of poems, and there were a few poems that I remembered really well and enjoyed kind of reminiscing, I guess. It was very nostalgic, but then there were other poems that were a lot more deep than I remember them being, that connected with me a little bit more later in life. So it was a really enjoyable time. I had a great time with it. It's pretty much as soon as this wrap up is done, I'm going to be sending it off with my nieces because I know that they'll love it too. But I really appreciate having this book sent back to me because it was very nostalgic and it was very introspective, and I had a really good time with it. Next book I'm going to talk about is Wheel of Time Book 7, and the review for this went up yesterday at the time that this video is going up. So I guess if you've read it already and you want to see my thoughts, check it out. It'll be linked up there and down in the description. But if you haven't read the series yet and you want to know a very short summary of my thoughts, they are this book. Well, we're in the slog. Wheel of Time is kind of known for having a section of about 4 books that are considered the slog, that are tough to get through. And I felt that. I definitely felt that. This was hard to push myself to read, but looking back, there were definitely some really awesome moments. There was some great character growth in a few characters. One character in particular really stands out to me now that I didn't really care about before. One character that I used to love is no longer cool. Overall, my feelings on this book are, I didn't love reading it, but some interesting things happened, so on we go. Next, I have The Book Thief, which I have a full spoiler-free review for. I'll link it up in the corner as well as down in the description. So this is a book that essentially doesn't have a plot. We follow a young girl and her family during World War II Germany, and we just kind of watch her grow up and follow her and the people in her household as they have different obstacles and as life gets hard and how they handle it. Now, the unique thing about this book is that it's narrated by Death, and so he spoils the book for you. Within the first 15 pages, he summarizes the book, but that's not the point. The point of the book isn't the shock value of who's gonna die and how it's all gonna go down and how hard this book is gonna hurt, which I thought was a really unique choice, and I really liked Death's voice. I think the fact that this book was entirely without a plot, which was intentional, and it was a choice, it wasn't a mistake, but the fact that it was without a plot and the fact that Death's narration ended up making me feel more removed from the story than actually helping me feel involved in it, it ended up not being my favorite book. Definitely not my favorite book in this genre, but I still thought it was really good. I'm still glad I read it. I didn't love it as much as everyone else seems to, but overall, we had some great discussion over on my Patreon where we buddy read this, and I'm glad I read it. Even if it wasn't perfectly for me, it was still I still had, just watch my spoiler-free review. I articulate myself better there. Next book I'll talk about is Climbing with Molly, and this is a nonfiction book. And this is a dad telling his story about how his daughter fell in love with and was naturally very good at rock climbing, and then he also ended up falling in love with it by extension, and how they bonded over it and how well she did. And it was just a really sweet story about a father and daughter and their adorable, wonderful, heartwarming relationship. I listened to this on audiobook, and the audiobook was, I think, 3 hours long. So it was very, very short. And that's probably one of the criticisms I have for this book, is just that it was so short, but it was really easy to get through, and it was very heartwarming. If you're looking for just a really quick, sweet, heartwarming father and daughter memoir story, it was really adorable, and I recommend it. I had a great time reading it. I grew up rock climbing with my dad, and dad listened to this audiobook right before I did, and I loved chatting with him about it. It brought back a lot of memories, and it was really great for me. Next, I have The Starless C, which is also a book that I reviewed, link over there and in the description. This book is one that I had very mixed feelings about. It is an extremely atmospheric book, so if you love books that focus a ton on the atmosphere and environment and how everything feels around you, then this book will very likely connect with you. It's about this boy named Zachary, who when he was, I think, 11, he found a hidden door, and he chose not to open it. And then later on in life, he finds this book in the library. It's kind of mysterious, and he starts reading it, and he realizes that the book is about him and what would have happened if he had opened that door. And through that, he then enters into a world of his own, and it is wild, and it's all about fairy tale worlds and how, like, living inside of a story and how stories connect, hidden doors. It's very Narnia-esque, but still very uniquely itself. And I loved this world so much. However, the characters were as boring as white rice. I don't know why I keep comparing Zachary to various food items, but he was really personality-less. Plus, there was some pretty big insta-love, not just with Zachary, but also with some other characters in the book. This book is chaotic. There's like a million different stories. That's not true. It's an exaggeration. There's a lot of different stories that are all handed to us separately without any context, and you have to get through a lot of chaos before they all start connecting and coming together. But man, I loved it when they did come together. This was a book that I couldn't tell if I liked it or hated it until I finished reading it. And then my overall thoughts are very positive. I'm glad I read it. I loved this world so much, and I really loved watching all these stories come together. But also, I'm so disappointed at the things that weren't given any sort of care, like character development and development in the romances that were throughout this book. I'm really disappointed because I loved this world so much that this could have easily been a new favorite, but there were several pieces of the story that were so neglected that it made me hold back a little bit of my love, and it makes me sad. I have really mixed feelings. Go check out the review. It's spoiler-free. But I also just summarized the review, so don't watch it. Next, let's talk about my classics. I have a whole classic wrap-up that I do every month, or try to remember to do every month. I'll link it up there and down below, and I talked about the classics that I read there, so very brief. I read Oliver Twist, which was painful but beautiful. And I read Robots of Dawn, I'm pretty sure it's called, which is the third book in Isaac Asimov's robot detective series. And I love the series, despite it being a genre that I don't typically read. The sci-fi elements make up for the fact that I don't love the detective elements. I talked about it over there. It's all spoiler-free. I also read A Modest Proposal, but it feels weird to count that as a book read because it was like 20 pages. It's like a pamphlet, but all my thoughts are in that video. Next, I have To Whom It Doesn't Concern. This is about a boy who is in high school, and one of his classmates, who he doesn't know very well and is a lot of bit prejudiced against, kills himself in front of people, and our main character sees it happen. And it's really traumatizing for the entire school. So we're dealing with the subject of suicide, we're dealing with the subject of grief, we're dealing with the subject of forgiveness. It's a hard-hitting contemporary. There's a lot of deep subjects explored, as well as a male-male romance. So I, full disclosure, have not finished this book at the time that I'm filming this video because I have to film it in the morning, but I'm going to finish this book this afternoon. I'm so close to the end. So I hate to give a proper condensed review having not actually read the ending yet, but So far, I've really enjoyed this book. So what I'm gonna do, since I haven't read it yet, is instead of summarizing my thoughts here, I'm going to give a detailed yet spoiler-free review over on Goodreads, and my Goodreads is always linked in the description. So if this book sounds interesting to you at all, go check out my Goodreads, because there are a lot of things that I'm loving about this book and a few things that I'm not loving the execution of as much. So if this interests you at all, go check out my Goodreads to get my final thoughts and a little bit more information. But also, this is a self-published author, so if it interests you at all, definitely check it out and support some self-pub authors. Next, I have The Harts Invisible Furies. So this is another book that is so very different from what I normally read and that I have really mixed opinions on. So this book is another one that wasn't written for me as a reader. It's another book entirely lacking in plot, and again, it was an intentional choice, not a mistake. And I just am the type of reader that I tend to like plot and character development, not one or the other, and I read several books that had one or the other this month. But despite this book not being written in the style that I tend to like, I still ended up really having great feelings about it in the end. So this is about a young boy named Cyril, and again, we watch him grow up, and it's just his life story. It's not a story about how he interacts with something in his life, but it's just his story. And he was born in, I can't remember the year, and I read it on ebook, so I don't even have a reference to go back to. Well, either way, he was born in Ireland when being gay is illegal, and he's gay, so that's rough. So we watch him grow up, and it's tough. And then we also watch him as an adult when a lot of things changes with the laws and his life circumstances, and oh my goodness, I love Cyril so much. There were some things that I definitely didn't like about this book, like the pacing, and not because it was slow-paced. I can get down with a slow-paced book, but the fact that we had a ton of time jumps, and then once we did the time jump, we'd look back to see what we missed, and then there were times where we would rehash scenes that we had already watched unfold, but then we'd have to watch it unfold again when a character was telling another character about a scene that we were there for. There were quite a few pacing issues that I had with this book, and then it's just the fact that it's written to be someone's life story instead of to be, no plot, which a lot of people love. I'm just talking about my experience with it. If you are a reader who loves people's life stories and who love stories that really focus on well-developed characters, please pick this book up. I buddy read this with my friend Amy, whose channel will be linked down below. And it's so funny because I wasn't really sure how I felt about the book. I really like the writing style. I really like Cyril. I really like several of the side characters, but I still had so many mixed feelings about it that I wasn't sure how I felt until I finished the book. And then I looked back and I realized, even though this book wasn't necessarily written for me, or wasn't written in the way I like books to be written, I love Cyril so much. And the way he handled conflict and oppression in his life, I loved this character so much, and I want to be friends with him so I can learn from him on how to appropriately handle people that are treating you poorly. And it's funny too, because after I finished it and I was talking to my friend Amy all about how much I love Cyril, she said, that's funny because I loved this book. It's one of her favorite books. And she said she doesn't even like Cyril. She likes all the side characters because Cyril is a very deeply flawed character that makes tons of terrible mistakes in his life. But I just overall love him so much. Anyway, this is another book that I have crazy mixed feelings on, but overall, I'm happy I read it, and if this sounds interesting to you, go for it. Next, we'll talk about Before They Were Hanged. So this is book 2 in the First Law trilogy, which is amazing. This is another book that's oddly off balance. It's very character focused, though I will say that there was finally a plot introduced in this series 2 books in, and it was so good. I love these characters. I love the development that they've experienced so far. I love this. I hate this world, but I love this world. And what these characters went through, the actual story that started, was so good. I am enjoying myself reading this trilogy so much, and it ended on a note that was so, it's really good, and I'm really excited for book 3. And now we're into the 5-star books. So first we have My Dark Vanessa. This is a book that I feel like I've exhausted talking about in the month of January, but at the same time, it feels like it was so long ago that I read it. I do have a dedicated spoiler-free review over there down in the description. My Dark Vanessa is about, it deals in then and now. So we have then, when she was 15 years old, she went off to a boarding school and she gets involved in this love affair with her professor. It all looks very romantic to her. And then we have the now, where her professor allegations have come out about him, about other students, and Vanessa is starting to get some hard truths about how not romantic her romance, her first love, was. This book was it was written in a very self-aware way where Vanessa was able to see the grooming that was happening and she was able to see the manipulation that was happening and how he would tell her that she has control and then never give her control. And she could see these things so that the reader isn't tricked into thinking, the reader isn't subject to thinking that, hey, yeah, this is romantic. We see how flawed it is because Vanessa's seeing it. And yet it was done delicately enough that it didn't feel like the author was holding her hands and telling us, this is bad. Because Vanessa, despite all the bad things she was seeing, was still swept away in it and didn't really care about all these bad things because she still viewed it as love. If this book interests you at all, I recommend checking out the spoiler-free review I did because I do talk about how incredibly difficult this book is to read and why, but also how impactful it is and why. I highly recommend it if you think you can handle the subject matter. And the last book I'm going to talk about, my favorite book this month, a book that is now on my favorites list, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. So I always look up genres for books so that I can categorize them correctly, and this book was a tough one to sort because it's written as psychological / self-help / comic book because of the beautiful designs and artwork inside the book. So I didn't know what to call it. It's certainly not nonfiction, which is what those categories seem, so I just put it under literary fiction. Anyway, this is like elementary school age, middle grade age book. And it's so beautiful. It handles tough truths and tough things that we tell ourselves and think about. And it puts them so simply and yet in such a way that invokes so much emotion and really makes you think. I wish I had grown up reading this book because it puts things in a way that I think would help a child really wrap their head around tough emotions that they're dealing with. But at the same time, I'm so glad I read it as an adult because, it was so beautiful and made me tear up multiple times. I read this to my son, again, a subscriber sent it to me, and Drennan sat through the whole thing, so it's easy for a kid to listen to, and I want to read it to him a lot growing up, and hopefully he'll get stuff out of it each time we read it together. He's a little bit young for it now, but oh well, he read it, and I loved it so much. This is another book I'm going to be passing on to my niece. Well, I'm going to let them borrow this book to my nieces, and then I'm also planning on buying a couple of copies for other members of the family because it's just really good, and I really recommend reading it. Even if you don't usually read younger books, you will get something out of this book. It's beautiful. You should read it. It's very rare that I tell my subscribers, you should read this book. Usually I just try to let you decide for yourself. But you should read this book. So those are some of the books that I read this month. I'd love to chat with you more about any of these down in the comments. I will also have links to all of these books in the description in case you want to check any of them out. I post videos every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.